Hello and most welcome to 1781. We will today continue the article Wittgenstein on Understanding by Warren Goldfarb. Last time, which I have to admit was rather difficult, the article is quite condensed. It wouldn't be unfair to say that it more or less requires quite extensive knowledge of Wittgenstein already. But it will help to lead you into the right way, so you could find your path. And we will yet more find these enormous varieties of features and how they play a tremendous role in our ascriptions of understanding or lack of understanding, and the dependence on these, on particularities of the context in which the ascription is made. So an oversimplification could be to say that when the picture is in place, you will make a too sharp distinction between inner and outer, just like the sharp distinction between concept and action, or concept and object. It is the very sharpness that is problematic. From the sharpness sort of evolves the misunderstanding. That's the place where it begins. And it covers up the rich multitude of things that are underneath. It covers up, it makes that sort of understanding almost impossible. The rich complexities of our spiritual life that we mentioned in the article by Meredith Warren and other articles disappears into the oversimplification that is just simply inner and outer. It makes no space for an incredible richness that gets covered up. And we have that in a paragraph here, paragraph 109 or 904 from the Remarks on Philosophy of Psychology. It is thus perfectly possible that certain psychological phenomena cannot be investigated physiologically. The reason is, listen now, because physiologically nothing corresponds to them. and that is further sharpened in the next paragraph, 906. The prejudice in favor of psychophysical parallelism is a fruit of primitive interpretations of our concepts. That is, if we look at all the things that we call manifestations of understanding, we find no physical or physiological regularity in them. Hence, there's no reason to expect a physical systematicity in understanding. If you eliminate all the mental notions, what are you left with by way of data? What you have left to do the science on is very little indeed. And let me just explain primitive interpretations. That is oversimplifications, like covering up all the interesting details of the inner by calling it inner, giving it a label that shuts the investigation down before it even had had a chance to commence. I continue. This is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th paragraph on page 118. The note Wittgenstein is here sounding as a Quinian ring. In fact, I do see a confluence between the two at this point. If one restricts oneself to the austere language of the physical sciences, which is the rightful home of the notion of cause that the objector is trying to exploit, then the data are very thin. You have people's movements and emissions of noises of various sorts. It would already be illicitly interpreting the data to say there are actions and there are words being spoken. In that, you do not see understanding at all. But then there exists little reason to think there will be a scientifically discoverable state that will group together just the right things under the concept of understanding. This is merely a plausibility argument. Although I think a rather strong one. But it can serve to undercut the scientific objection in an additional way as well. Part of the force of the objection, part of the reason one might think to look for brain state that causes manifestations of understanding is simply a Laplacian view that everything we do is caused. But what is caused in that sense is behavior in the most physicalistic sense. If you have applied the Laplacian picture to notions like the understanding, then what you have done has inflated the data. You have a mere metaphysical insistence rather than anything that comes from a scientific worldview. The point underlines what I have been implicitly suggesting all along, that the inclination to think that science might discover an appropriate state rests on an accession to a picture of the mental apparatus of definite states. And processes of some sort. Given those states and processes, questions can then be framed of whether they can be tied down physically, if, on the contrary, the only apparatus assumed is physical, then upon scrutiny, it becomes clear how little conception we have of what is supposed to be discovered. There's an objection to all of these points, though. Surely it will be said one can, without acceding to any overblown ideas of the mental. Imagine the discovery of a physical state that a person is in. Is in if and only if that person, say, understands a particular word, a state that is merely coextensive with understanding, with no further structure presumed. However, this is far less clear than it might seem. For what Wittgenstein emphasizes, the non-uniformity of or criteria for understanding and their intertwining with much else in our physical, social, and mental lives. Represents differences from the models we have of states and processes in the physical science. The features we rely upon in finding general properties of our structures in, for instance, physical substances, features that lead us to call them natural kinds, and that allows us to generalize from one sample to another, are lacking. Thus, it becomes unclear how anything we discover, in some cases in which we would ascribe understanding, could be justifiably generalized to all cases. There are, in a sense, too many singularities. Perhaps that should be the end of the matter. But one might feel inclined to indulge the objection and to suppose that we can carve out some class of cases that is tractable enough from the standpoint of physical science to support inductions, yet broad enough to be interesting. Now suppose further that we discover a physical state common to all cases within this class that are cases of understanding. Is this a discovery of a state of understanding? There is in Wittgenstein's considerations a suggestion that even if we can make sense of being able to identify some physical features of the brain somehow linked with the cases of understanding, then anything that we could discover would be at best concomitants of understanding and not what the understanding itself is. For supposing I had found something that happened in all those cases of understanding, why should it be the understanding? The difficulty here lies in making this point out without returning to the grammatical argument. I'm concerned to avoid, and thereby inputting some form of essentialism to Wittgenstein. Obviously, were we to discover that in some tractable class of cases, an understanding of the word eleemosynary goes along with a disposition to blink upon her hearing the word, then we have discovered an accompaniment of understanding, not anything we would identify with the understanding itself. The blinking has no connection to those things that are importantly involved in understanding. That is correct usage and the ability to explain the word. Hence, the discovered dispositions seems extrinsic to understanding, a mere accidental concomitant, rather than anything we would be inclined to call the state of understanding. Clearly then, any brain state, if it is not to be dismissed as a mere accompaniment of understanding, would have to be suitably connected to the features that we rely upon in our ordinary ascriptions of understanding. It would have to be identified by way of the manifestations and practices. So in the end, more than a bare coextensiveness claim is needed. But then, once again, the considerations elicited by Wittgenstein's investigation of the nature of our ascriptive practices come into play. Here they serve to show that anything isolable enough and general enough to be usable for identification of a particular brain state could reflect little of the range of our practices. Consequently, it can be argued any state that is so identified would have a tenuous claim to being the state of understanding that the scientific objector claimed to envisage. To argue this, to elaborate the requirement that the brain state be linked to criteria of understanding, we should look closely at the work the scientific objection was supposed to do. We must evoke or uncover specific characterizations of what the state that is the understanding itself is wanted for. What work the isolation of such a state is meant to do for example, suppose that one takes the understanding itself to be needed in order that there be a principled distinction between a mistaken usage and a different understanding. That is, any possible different understanding. That would demand that the state be connected in some way to all correct usages that is all correct possible states. All correct possible uses, sorry. For if it had a connection to only a subset of them, then the state would be indistinguishable by itself from the different understanding which would issue in only the correct uses in that subset. If we continue to think of connections here to be causal, we then have the demand that the state causally produce all correct further responses. This is just the demand Kripke puts on such states in his book, and he argues persuasively that it cannot be met. The demands we impose for a state's being more than a mere accompaniment of understanding. It now appears depend on what we expect from the identification of a state of understanding. This is, I think, corroborated by consideration of an intermediate case. Ignoring numerous difficulties and obscurities, let us suppose we can imagine the discovery of a brain state that is common within some tractable class of cases to those who understand the word table, and that is identified by causal links to the correct usages in just a few straightforward cases and links confrontations with paradigmatic tables. In this imagined case, are we to call the state the understanding, or merely an accompaniment of understanding? My reaction is to echo Wittgenstein's remark. Say what you choose, as long as it does not prevent you from seeing the facts. Whether or not one claims the identification, what is important to note is how little, by way of further enterprises, are supported. Precisely because the states lacks connection to important features of understanding. It provides no basis for claims about the structure of the understanding. It provides no basis for claims about the structure of the understanding. Very important. And little notion of the content of what is understood. It does not even have links to straightforward verdicts about tables and non-tables beyond the paradigmatic few, and does not intrinsically rule out other possible different understandings. As a result, the connections between understanding and the content that are crucial to any philosophical, cognitive, psychological, logical, or semantic theorizing are absent. The lesson is that once we reflect on any particular task, philosophical or mentalistic, that the discovery of a state of understanding was to do, the paucity of features that could be built into a specification of brain state will make such a state look too little like the understanding itself. Given what we wanted from a definite, particular state of understanding, what we can imagine discovering scientifically will not suffice. Clearly enough, clearly though, the success of this line of argument will rest to a considerable extent on Wittgenstein's more basic strategies to show the inaptness of definite state or process characterizations of understanding. That is, one has to undermine a picture of the mental apparatus at the start and emphasize the intricacy, connectedness, and non-uniformity of our practices of ascription, so as to make clear how different this is from the case of mechanism in the physical world. The scientific objector always has examples from the physical sciences of in mind. we discovered the internal constitution of ammonia, whatever that would mean. To this, we ought to respond. Understanding is not like ammonia. Wittgenstein's investigations are meant to bring us to see how different the cases are. The surroundings that make what is ammonia is a question. What is make ammonia a question? The same question as what is the structure of ammonia are absent for what is the understanding of table, or worse yet, what is the structure of the understanding of table. Wittgenstein's aim is to get us to reflect on differences that make the latter question so peculiar. And that ends the article by Warren D. Goldfarb. And oddly enough, the best start is actually at the end here. This should be put in gold. The surroundings that make what is ammonia a question. The same question, what is the structure of ammonia, are absent for what is the understanding of table. Wittgenstein's aim is to get us to reflect on differences that make the latter question so peculiar. Go to some quotes here. So what goes for chemistry, Wittgenstein has here showed does not apply to expressions like understanding or knowledge, memory. It's a conceptual primitivism. On page 118. The big paragraph, I don't know if it's number 5 or 6. It's the third paragraph from the end. The biggie. It's like 8 lines from the bottom, beginning with part. Part of the force of the objection, part of the reason one might think to look for the brain state that causes manifestations is simply a Laplacian view that everything we do is caused. So it's an illicit transferal from a Laplacian viewpoint to the area of psychology, or the invented area of psychology. The second last paragraph. The point underlines what I have been implicitly suggesting all along, that the inclination to think that science might discover an appropriate state rests on an accession to a picture of the mental apparatus of definite states and processes of some sort. Given those states and processes, questions can then be framed of whether they can be tied down physically. If, on the contrary, the only apparatus assumed is physical, then upon scrutiny, it becomes clear how little conception we have of what is supposed to be discovered. So the myth of cause, well, you can think of quantum physics when nothing is caused. It's the observer and the superposition. There's no causation there. The invention of mental states, so to reflect or mirrors outsidedness. I imagine you can see now how the inner outer, as the outer being reflected in the inner, is part of the picture. I think that is a correct understanding of the oversimplification called inner. Go to the second paragraph on page 119. The second sentence there, the beginning with now, I think it could be quite helpful. Now suppose further that we discover a physical state common to all the cases within this class that are cases of understanding. Is this a discovery of a state of understanding? There is in Wittgenstein's considerations a suggestion that even if we can make sense of being able to identify some physical features of the brain somehow linked with the cases of understanding. And listen now, then anything that we could discover would be at least concomitants of understanding and not what understanding itself is. For even supposing I had found something that happened in all those cases of understanding, why should it be the understanding? Opening up the skull, as a psychologist would imagine it could be happen, making an excavation to find the little piece of the brain that is the understanding. Becomes hard to support. Second paragraph on page 120. To argue this, to elaborate the requirement that the brain state be linked to criteria of understanding, we should look closely at the work the scientific objection was supposed to do. We must evoke or uncover specific characterizations of what the state that is the understanding is itself. is wanted for, what work the isolation of such a state is meant to do. For example, suppose that one takes the understanding itself to be needed in order that there be a principal distinction between a mistaken usage and a different understanding, that is, any possible different understanding. Well, we need a corollary to know if when we went into the brain to find the understanding piece, that it is that piece that is the actual understanding. To compare them, so you see once more the tuning instrument is at work here to find the correct understanding device. See, my colleague want to come in here at this stage. Lundholm.
Yes, let's go back to 111. I think one of the main points of this paper, namely this phrase, nothing is hidden. I don't know where Wittgenstein said that, but it's still one of the key phrases of this paper. And another key phrase is my phrase, there is no causality. And we can compare it with the concluding paragraph of this paper, namely here, like, what is ammonia? For the benefit of viewers, not everybody knows what ammonia is. We look it up. It's gas, pungent gas, composed of nitrogen and hydrogen. Why is this interesting? Well, if you think about the Platonic world, you can have perhaps a table there, although I don't understand how it should look like. But what Plato forgets is our senses. In the case of ammonia, let us suppose there is an ideal ammonia. How should it smell? How should we feel the smell? Does it not also play a role? This I apologize for the noise. So we need the senses. So it's the sense is actually the exterior thing. Ammonia, in a way, they are exterior. They are in one way more important than what we have inside us, because we cannot know them. They are hidden, and we cannot, so to say, explain everything from inside things. There's no causality. We cannot try explain things like Freud did with sexuality, that somewhere there inside us we had a trauma, and then he wants to take it out. Instead, a lot of things like the senses that Plato obscured. Hans, do you want to add?
Yeah, yes, that's great. Yeah, definitely. It's Plato is doing a similar mistake, and he forgets the senses, and he also forgets in this world of ideas, how could that discern one idea from another when there is no use? How would you be able to as in the example of the table, to tell it from a chair. You need the senses, you need to sit on it. We need comparison. It's simply that a table in the Platonic world doesn't make any sense at all.
Yes. Say you want to ask this question, what is ammonia? What is ammonia in the Platonic world? It would be difficult to explain it if you don't use also your senses, because it's one of its characteristics. And imagine also table, the other table is the table with a smell. Think about a delicate table, wood, how it smells. But Plato eliminates all that.
Well, yes, it's the table's use, you have the table's feel, and above all, you have how you put plates on the table and so on. And all those things are ignored. All the complexities are like no longer present.
So we have a tendency in the Western world to hide things, like Plato hide things in the Platonic world, and Freud hide things in our bodies, so to say. Mental states that Freud wanted to. And so that is a problem in Western thinking, to hide things, while Wittgenstein says nothing is hidden.
No, exactly.
Although I don't think, as far as I've seen, Wittgenstein himself doesn't emphasize smells. He is more in focusing on observation, like the rabbit and duck and so forth.
Yeah, definitely. And it's another thing. Stephen Affelt turns up here. In the notes, I see it. And there is also a mentioning of Kripke. So there might be some points to Kripke as well. But it's a very strong argument from thinking itself against psychology, that there is a major thinking mistake done. And the mistake in psychology, for instance, of course, psychology is not on the accused position here, but can bring it in anyway. And it's a conceptual mistake. It's not a matter for science to be solved. And that's pretty strong, actually.
Well, perhaps we should end there. This paper by Goldfarb.
Sounds good. Thank you very much for going through this interesting and complicated paper. I will have a look into Kripke on Wittgenstein on rules. I can see it here, published in 1985. If you go back where you were, you saw it. It's on the page with Mr. Goldfarb. Yeah, very good. I will have a look at it tonight. I say thank you very much, Kalle Lundahl, participating and being patient with this rather complicated paper. And thank you everyone for participating, listening, and have a very good morning, afternoon, or night. Bye everyone.